basically. They needed to know what was where, who owned what, how much did they own, and there's a few theories as to why he did that, to maybe settle some disputes that might have been going on at the time between different earls, also so that he knew how much tax that he could get out of different people. That's another potentially big thing. I'm just trying to find the page to just check that I don't miss anything that the textbook wants you to know about the Doomsday Book, but I'm struggling, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. So yeah, he would also know, yeah, there's one that I'd forgotten. He would also know how much land people had, how money they had, so then he would know how many soldiers he could get out of them in times of need. So all of this was carried out. It's a huge administrative task to go all across the country and make sure this happened in 1085. And one bit of context is at this time he was really fearing a Danish invasion. So those are things that the book wants you to know about the Doomsday Book itself. What was the culture of the Norman aristocracy like? Well, one maybe big change was this book, French. They like to play different sorts of games like chess and dice. Hunting was the favourite activity. We've just talked about the King's Land, so a lot of hunting went on at the time. Knights, well, they trained young boys as knights from a very early age. The nobles were expected to be generous to the knights who fought for them, so those tenants-in-chief had to provide knights for the king. The knights expected reward for their service, so they had to do that sort of thing. Yeah, speaking French is going to be the biggest by far, that the nobility now speak French, when the nobility in the language of the ruling classes was always not French before. They'd be speaking in, well, an Anglo-Saxon language, not quite English as we know it today. So yeah, they thought bravery, loyalty, they thought warlike, they trained young boys from a young age. It was a bit of a different thing, but the big thing would be this book, French. Describe the career of Bishop Odo. What a guy. Well, he was William's half-brother. He was a bishop. He rode into battle in the Battle of Hastings. And it's possibly Bishop Odo who paid for the Bayeux Tapestry to be created. We're not sure entirely, but it's one fairly popular theory. Bishop Odo fought in the Battle of Hastings. Bit of an interesting fact for you. He wasn't allowed to fight with a sword because it was seen as an ungodly weapon, but he was allowed a mace, which is like a wooden club with a metal bit on the end. So he wasn't allowed to stab people, but he could bash their skull in. So anyway, he also acted as regent sometimes when William was out of the country. Remember, regent is the word for somebody who is acting as the ruler when the actual king is not around, on behalf of the actual king. So Bishop Odo often did that. Towards the later part of his life, he got it into his head to go to Italy. It's a bit vague, all of this, but he was probably going to try to overthrow the Pope so he could become Pope himself, and William told him not to do it. And Bishop Odo went to try to do it anyway, so William chucked him in prison and left him there, until he was on his deathbed, when he pardoned him and let his own half-brother out. And what his own half-brother did was then cause trouble, because William died and he left two sons, well, three important sons. He gave his eldest Normandy, and his favourite, the second eldest, he gave England to rule over. And Bishop Odo tried to get people who supported William's eldest son, Robert, to rebel in England, overthrow his second eldest son, William Rufus, and unite Normandy in England. The whole thing didn't get off the ground. Bishop Odo was in England. He kind of led the rebellion, and he was captured and sent into exile, never allowed into England again. And so, yeah, I think did he die on crusade? He did. He died on crusade. So he died going to Jerusalem to go and fight in the crusades. That's Bishop Odo. William I's family. Well, he had his wife Matilda, who by all accounts he seemed to love very much. He had his eldest brother Robert, who he actually fought in a civil sort of war in Normandy, fought against his own son. He had William Rufus, who was probably his most favourite son, his second oldest. He gave him the Kingdom of England. And then there was Henry. They had 9 children in total. But there was another son, but he died, and there was 5 daughters, which were married off to other powerful people. Why did William fight his son? Well, his son wanted Normandy before his dad died. He was like, I want Normandy now. He had lots of followers and hangers-on that he wanted to reward. It was a bit embarrassing to him that he couldn't reward them, so he wanted the reward then. Oh, look. Well, the cat's come in to interrupt my video. Thanks, Nigel, and my wife's come in to interrupt the video. Would you like to go away, wife, please? I'm just in the middle of something. Thank you. There we go. So what happened? Yeah, so Robert demands this, William wouldn't give it to him, and the relationship starts to falter. And then it all comes to a head when Robert's brothers, William Rufus and Henry, weed on him. So they peed on their heads, probably from a bit of a balcony, peed on the heads of Robert and his friends, and they went up to go and have a massive fight with him, which broke out. William went to sort it out, and Robert stormed off. It's a classic sibling rivalry, sibling argument that got out of hand. But Robert took his followers and went to go and attack one of his dad's castles. Now, it didn't work, but the King of France and the Count of Flanders got wind of this and were like, one of our enemies is in trouble here. His own son's rebelling against him. I know how we can take advantage of this. We can give him a castle, and he can use that to rebel against his dad. So they gave him a castle, and that's exactly what he did. He stayed in his castle, kept raiding into Normandy, going back into his castle, until his dad got so fed up with him that William went to sort him out. And he's called William the Conqueror for a reason. You'd think he'd sort him out. He didn't. He lost. He lost in the fight with his son. His wife was desperate for him to make peace. His earls wanted him to make peace. And so William gave in and made peace with Robert. And named him as heir. He said, okay, I'll name you my heir. You can take Normandy after I die. And he was a bit vague about England. But he said, I'll name him his heir. On his actual deathbed, he gave the kingdom of England to William Rufus. But anyway, the fighting stopped there. And there we go. So what happened? Well, I think I've already mentioned this. Who inherited what after William died? Robert Normandy, William Rufus England. Henry got £5,000, which is a huge chunk of money at that time. What was the 1088 rebellion and why did it happen? Well, I've already mentioned it with Bishop Odo. The Norman earls, barons, tenants-in-chiefs, whatever you want to call them, their land is split between England and Normandy. And that's a bit of a conflict of interest because William Rufus is in control of England and Robert's in control of Normandy. So who's your boss? Who do you owe your loyalty to? It was easy when it was just William, but now it's 2 different sons. It's a bit of a problem. And Robert wanted England. And Bishop Odo was a supporter of Robert, the oldest brother, rather than William Rufus. So Bishop Odo hatches a plan to start a rebellion to try to throw out William Rufus in 1088, the year after he took the throne. But it doesn't really get going. It does get going, but not for very long, because William Rufus goes and deals with it before Robert can arrive from Normandy. Captures Bishop Odo, kicks him out, punishes the rebels, job done, sorted. So William Rufus stays as King of England, and Robert stays, for the time being, as Duke of Normandy. And that's the 3rd section. There we go, you can fill in your sheet now. Champion.